They chained her to a frozen wagon, a blind sacrifice meant to appease a monster. She expected fangs. She expected death. What she didn't expect was the most feared alpha in the realm falling to his knees, stripping away his crown, and pressing his forehead to hers. "Mine," he whispered. The winter wind howling through the jagged peaks of the northern pass felt less like air and more like broken glass against Isolda's skin. She shivered, pulling the thin, moth-eaten wool cloak tighter around her frail shoulders, though it did nothing to stave off the biting cold. Her wrists throbbed where the heavy iron manacles bit into her skin, chaining her to the wooden wheel of the transport wagon. Isolde was born into the Ashbourne Pack, a prosperous territory built on rich soil, silver mines, and absolute cruelty. In a world where a wolf's worth was measured by their strength in battle or their ability to breed strong warriors, an Omega was already at the bottom of the hierarchy. A blind Omega, however, was treated as a curse from the moon goddess herself. For 20 years, Isolde's world had been one of complete darkness, navigated only by sound, scent, and the stinging backhands of her pack members. "Stop your whimpering," hissed a voice to her left. The scent of heavy rose perfume and anxiety gave her away. It was Beatrice, Isolde's older half-sister, the prized jewel of the Ashbourne Pack. "I am freezing, Beatrice," Isolde whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, just loosen the iron. I cannot run away. I cannot even see where I would run to." "That is exactly why the chains stay," a deep, gravelly voice interrupted. The heavy crunch of snow signaled the approach of Lord Harlan, their father and the Alpha of Ashbourne. He smelled of stale ale and fear. "If you wander off into a ravine, the Beast King will think we denied him his tribute, and he will march his horde down upon our lands and slaughter us all." The tribute. The Beast King of the North, Alpha Gideon of the Iron Ridge Mountains. For a decade, the Iron Ridge Pack had terrorized the borders of the southern lands. Gideon was a warlord of unmatched brutality, a massive, scarred lichen who had united the feral northern packs under one bloody banner. To keep him from invading Ashbourne, Lord Harlan had brokered a desperate treaty, a heavy tax of silver, grain, and an alpha-blooded bride to warm the king's bed. The bride was supposed to be Beatrice. But as the day of the exchange approached, Harlan's cowardice took over. He could not bear to send his golden, beautiful daughter to be torn apart by a barbarian. So, he devised a treasonous swap. He dressed his blind, unwanted Omega daughter in Beatrice's bridal silks, chained her like livestock at the border, and prayed the Beast King was too stupid or too bloodthirsty to care about the difference. "Father, he will know," Isolde pleaded, tears freezing on her pale cheeks. "He asked for an Alpha's daughter. He will smell that I am an Omega. He will kill me." Harlan stepped close, grabbing Isolde's chin with a bruising grip. "Then you will die serving your pack for the first and last time in your miserable life. Keep your mouth shut. If you tell him who you are, I swear to the goddess, I will hunt you down myself." He threw her face aside. Isolde stumbled, her knees hitting the frozen mud. "The wind is shifting," Harlan barked to his guards. "The northern wolves are coming. Leave her. Ride hard for the gates." Isolde heard the frantic scrambling of boots, the cracking of whips, and the terrified whinnies of the horses. The wagon she was chained to remained stationary, its wheels locked. The pounding of hooves faded into the howling wind, leaving her in absolute, terrifying isolation. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Isolde sank into the snow, wrapping her arms around her knees. She was going to die here. If the cold didn't take her, the wolves would. The Beast King was known to shift into a monster the size of a bear, tearing men in half with his jaws. What would he do to a deceptive, blind sacrifice? Time lost its meaning. Her fingers went numb. Her heartbeat slowed to a sluggish rhythm. And then, the earth began to tremble. It wasn't horses. It was the synchronized, rhythmic thud of massive paws hitting the frozen earth. Dozens of them. A vanguard of lichens. The scent hit her immediately. Pine needles, copper, wood smoke, and a heavy, suffocating musk of pure, unfiltered alpha dominance. A cacophony of low, rumbling growls surrounded her. They were circling the wagon. Isolde squeezed her blind eyes shut, her breathing shallow, waiting for the teeth to sink into her flesh. "Ashbourne leaves us a chained dog," a harsh voice spat. "An insult. The king demands a bride, and they leave a prisoner." "Quiet, Vane," another voice ordered. Then, a sound that made every muscle in Isolde's body lock. Heavy, slow footsteps, boots crushing the snow. The Alpha, Gideon. The air grew so dense with his aura that Isolde felt as though she were drowning. He stopped directly in front of her. Isolde trembled violently, her head bowed, her silver hair falling over her face. She waited for the execution blow. Instead, a sharp, ragged gasp ripped from the Beast King's chest. Gideon stood towering over the shivering form chained to the wagon. He was a terrifying sight, 6.5 feet of scarred muscle, clad in dark leathers and furs, with a jagged crown of black iron resting upon his brow. His golden eyes, usually cold and dead, were currently blown wide. His pupils dilated until his eyes were almost entirely black. The scent that wafted from the freezing, pitiful creature in the snow hit him like a physical blow to the chest. It cut through the metallic tang of winter and the stench of his warriors. Rainwater, crushed lavender, vanilla. It was a scent that punched straight into the ancient, feral part of his brain. His lichen half, a beast he kept tightly leashed, roared to life, thrashing against his ribs. Mate. Gideon staggered back half a step, his chest heaving. For 30 years he had ruled with an iron fist, convinced the goddess had cursed him to rule alone. Mates were a weakness. Mates were meant for softer kings in softer lands. Yet here she was, freezing to death, in chains. A feral, deafening roar ripped from Gideon's throat, shaking the snow from the surrounding trees. His vanguard, battle-hardened lichens who feared nothing, instantly dropped to their bellies in submission, whimpering at the sudden, suffocating wave of their king's killing intent. Isolde screamed, curling into a tight ball waiting for death. Who did this? Gideon's voice was no longer human. It was the dual-toned, guttural snarl of an alpha lichen on the verge of a blood rage. He dropped to his knees in the snow before her. Isolde flinched as massive, calloused hands reached for her. But they didn't strike her. Instead, Gideon grasped the heavy iron chains binding her wrists. With a terrifying groan of exertion, the metal heated under his grip, and with a violent snap, he shattered the thick iron links with his bare hands. Isolde gasped, pulling her bruised wrists to her chest. "Do not fear me," Gideon choked out, his voice thick with an emotion he didn't recognize. Panic. He reached up and violently ripped the heavy iron crown from his head, tossing it carelessly into the snow. It was a symbol of his terror, and he wanted no part of it near her. He shrugged off his massive dire bear fur cloak and immediately wrapped it around Isolde's trembling shoulders. The cloak dwarfed her, swallowing her in its dark, sweltering warmth. It smelled overwhelmingly of him musk, cedar, and raw power. "My king?" Vayne, his second in command, dared to speak from the ground. "She is not the Alpha's daughter. She is an Omega. Harlan has deceived us. We should ride south and burn Ashbourne to the ground." Gideon ignored him. His glowing eyes were fixed on Isolde's face. He gently brushed her silver hair back from her frozen cheeks. It was then he noticed the milky, pale film covering her unseeing blue eyes. Blind. His mate was blind, and her own pack had chained her in the snow as bait. The rage that spiked in Gideon was so intense, his vision tunneled red. He wanted to march south, rip Harlan's spine from his body, and mount his head on a spike. But right now, his mate was shivering uncontrollably, her lips tinged blue. "You are cold," Gideon murmured, his voice softening into a deep, soothing rumble that shocked his warriors to their core. The Beast King did not soothe. He destroyed. "Please," Isolde stammered, her sightless eyes wide. Don't eat me. I know I am not Beatrice. I am sorry. I am nobody." Gideon's heart physically ached. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead gently against hers. The contact sent a jolt of pure electricity through both of them. Isolde gasped, the warmth of the bond rushing into her frozen veins, terrifying and intoxicating all at once. "You are not nobody," Gideon whispered fiercely against her skin. "You are everything. You are mine." Before Isolde could process the words, Gideon scooped her into his massive arms, lifting her against his broad chest as easily as if she weighed nothing. He stood, turning to his stunned vanguard. "Vayne," Gideon barked, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "Send word to Lord Harlan. Tell him his tribute is accepted. And tell him that if he or anyone from Ashbourne ever steps foot in the north again, I will personally bathe in their blood. But King Gideon, she is an Omega. She is your queen." Gideon roared, his alpha command forcing Vayne to his knees. The next man who questions her worth will lose his tongue. Now, we ride for High Reach. The Luna is freezing. Gideon whistled sharply, and his massive warhorse, a beast bred for the mountains, trotted forward. Climbing into the saddle with Isolde securely pressed against his heart, the Beast King wrapped his cloak tighter around her, burying his face in her lavender-scented hair. Isolde clung to his leathers, utterly disoriented. Her father had promised her a monster, but as she buried her face into the chest of the Beast King, surrounded by the warmth of his furious, protective embrace, she felt something she hadn't felt in 20 years. Safe. The citadel of High Reach was not a castle. It was a fortress carved directly into the black obsidian rock of the Iron Ridge Mountains. For Isolde, the journey had been a blur of terrifying heights and the relentless, steady heartbeat of the man holding her. When they arrived, the fortress was a sensory overload. Isolde could hear the echoing footsteps of hundreds of warriors, the clanging of blacksmith hammers forging steel, and the crackle of massive hearth fires. But above it all, she felt the sheer, suffocating weight of judgment. Gideon carried her directly into the great hall. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. Hundreds of predatory lichens stared at the small, frail girl wrapped in their king's furs. "Summon the healers. Prepare the royal chambers," Gideon ordered as he strode toward the dais. "My king," a smooth, silken voice echoed through the hall. "Lord Corvin, the eldest counselor of Iron Ridge, and a traditionalist who believed in the purity of alpha bloodlines." Isolde could hear the sharp tap of his walking cane. "You bring us a prize from the south, but surely you do not intend to seat a blind southern Omega upon the throne of the north." Gideon stopped. Isolde felt his chest rumble with a low growl. "Watch your words, Corvin," Gideon warned. "She is my fated mate." Murmurs erupted through the hall. The Beast King had a mate? And it was this fragile, broken thing? "Fated she may be," Corvin countered smoothly, masking his disdain. "But the North is harsh, Gideon. A Luna must lead the pack when you ride to war. She must be strong. This girl, she is blind. She cannot even see the enemies that surround her." Isolde shrank against Gideon's chest. Corvin was right. She was useless, a burden. But as Corvin spoke, something strange happened to Isolde. The darkness that usually clouded her vision shifted. It was as if a heavy velvet curtain was being drawn back, revealing not light, but color. She couldn't see Corvin's physical form, but she suddenly felt him. An aura of sickly, pulsing yellow-green emanated from where his voice originated. It smelled like rotting leaves and poison. It was malice, pure, unadulterated treachery. For her entire life, Isolde's blindness had kept her in the dark. But now, tethered to the immense power of her alpha mate, an ancient, dormant gene within her was waking up. She wasn't just an Omega. She was a seer. Gideon set her down gently on her feet on the dais, keeping a protective arm around her waist. He turned to face his court. "Her strength is not your concern," Gideon declared, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "She is the Luna of Iron Ridge. Her word is my word. Her enemies are my enemies." He looked down at her, his expression softening entirely. "I will be her eyes." Later that evening, after the healers had attended to her bruised wrists and bathed her in warm, scented oils, Isolde sat by the massive fireplace in the king's chambers. She was dressed in soft, heavy silks that felt like a dream against her skin. The heavy oak doors creaked open. Gideon stepped in. The heavy scent of his authority shifted into something softer, more hesitant. The Beast King, terror of the realm, was nervous. "Are you warm enough?" he asked gruffly, standing a safe distance away. Isolde turned her head toward him. In her mind's eye, his aura was a brilliant, blazing gold, interwoven with deep, protective blues. It was overwhelming, beautiful, and completely honest. "I am," she said softly. "Thank you, my king." "Gideon," he corrected quickly, taking a step closer. "To you, I am just Gideon." He knelt before her chair, taking her small hands in his massive ones. "I know this is terrifying. I know what they call me in the South. A monster. A butcher. Are you?" she asked, her sightless eyes seeking his face. "To my enemies, yes," he admitted honestly. "But to you, I swear to the goddess, Isolde, I will never let harm come to you. You are the only light in this cursed life of mine." Isolde reached out, her trembling fingers tracing the harsh lines of his jaw, feeling the thick, jagged scar that ran down his cheek. He leaned into her touch, closing his eyes, practically purring like a massive cat. But their peace was short-lived. The following night, Gideon was called to the war room to deal with a skirmish on the western border. Isolde was left in the royal baths, attended by 2 young Omega maids. The warm water was a luxury she had never known. As she soaked, the strange, shifting colors in her mind returned. The warm, comforting orange auras of her maids suddenly flickered and vanished, replaced by the heavy thud of bodies hitting the stone floor. Isolde froze. The scent of copper and steel filled the humid air. Then, she saw it in her mind's eye. A creeping, sickly yellow-green aura stepping into the bathhouse. It was the same rotting malice she had felt from Lord Corvan, though the physical footsteps belonged to someone much heavier. An assassin. "The king is foolish to keep a broken toy," a raspy voice whispered. A drawn blade hummed through the air. Isolde didn't have time to scream. Operating purely on the newly awakened instincts of her seer blood, she dropped beneath the surface of the water just as a heavy broadsword swung through the empty air where her neck had been a second before. She burst from the water on the other side of the stone pool, gasping for air. "Help!" she screamed, her voice echoing off the tiles. The assassin vaulted over the edge of the pool, splashing into the water, grabbing her by the hair. "Die quietly, southern trash." Before the blade could fall, the heavy iron doors of the bathhouse didn't just open, they exploded inward, ripped entirely off their stone hinges. A monstrous roar tore through the steam. It was a sound that shook the very foundations of High Reach. Gideon hadn't just returned, he had shifted fully. A massive, 9-foot lichen beast of pure muscle and black fur lunged into the room. The assassin didn't even have time to turn around before Gideon's jaws clamped down on the traitor's shoulder, violently throwing him across the room like a rag doll. The man slammed into the stone wall with a sickening crunch. Gideon shifted back to his human form mid-stride, heedless of his nakedness, and dove into the pool. He grabbed Isolde, pulling her out of the water and crushing her against his chest, his breathing ragged and panicked. "I'm here," he repeated, kissing the top of her wet head, his hands frantically checking her for wounds. I have you. I have you." Isolde clung to him, trembling, but she forced herself to speak. She pointed a shaking finger toward the broken, groaning body of the assassin on the floor. "Gideon," she whispered, her voice surprisingly steady. "He smells of rotting leaves. He was sent by Lord Corvan." Gideon froze. He looked down at his blind mate, his golden eyes narrowing in shock. "How could you possibly know that?" Isolde touched her own chest where her heart pounded against his. "Because, my king, I think I am finally starting to see." The stone walls of the great hall were suffocatingly silent. It was a silence so profound that Isolde could hear the crackle of the hearth fire and the heavy, furious breathing of her mate. Gideon stood before the High Council, the bloody, broken broadsword of the assassin thrown onto the massive oak table. "Treason." Gideon's voice was a terrifying, low rumble that rattled the goblets on the table. An assassin in the Luna's bathhouse. An assassin who bypassed 3 sets of royal guards. "Explain." Lord Corvan sat at the far end of the table, his cane resting between his knees. To the ordinary eye, he looked like a concerned, aging statesman, but to Isolde, who stood silently beside Gideon, Corvan was a swirling vortex of sickly yellow-green light. His aura reeked of rotting wood and copper, the scent of premeditated murder. "My king, this is a tragedy," Corvan said smoothly, his voice dripping with feigned sorrow. "The southern spies are clearly infiltrating our ranks. Lord Harlan of Ashbourne must have sent this man to finish the insult he started when he sent you a broken Omega." Gideon's hand twitched toward his axe, his lichen growling beneath his skin. The assassin was northern, Corvan. He bore the tattoos of the Iron Ridge Lower Guard. "A tragic corruption, then," Corvan countered seamlessly. "But surely you do not suspect anyone on this council. We have served the Iron Crown for decades. Who accuses us? The blind girl who cannot even see her own hands?" The council members murmured in agreement. To them, Isolde was a liability, a southern trick meant to weaken their warlord. Isolde stepped forward. She didn't have her sight, but she had something sharper. Much like the historical accounts found in the private journals of Lady Margaret Pole during the brutal Tudor reign, where women relied on raw intuition and whispered secrets to survive courtly betrayals, Isolde relied on the body, raw, vibrating energy of the room. The seer blood in her veins, dormant for generations, was now fully awakened by the bond with a true alpha. "I do not need to see your face to see your soul, Lord Corvin," Isolde said. Her voice, usually soft, rang with a strange harmonic resonance that made the Lycan counselors shift uncomfortably. "You smell of nightshade and silver dust," she continued, tilting her head. "You met with a messenger from my father, Lord Harlan, 3 nights ago at the edge of the Whispering Woods. You promised him the northern silver mines in exchange for his southern archers. You intend to ambush the king at the Howling Pass." The great hall erupted into chaos. Vane, Gideon's second in command, drew his blade. Corvin leaped to his feet, his composure shattering. "Lies! Witchcraft! She is a southern spy! She is trying to turn you against your own blood, Gideon!" Gideon raised a single, massive hand. The room fell dead silent. He looked at Isolde, his golden eyes burning with absolute, unquestioning faith. He didn't ask if she was sure. He didn't ask for proof. "Arrest him," Gideon ordered softly. "You cannot do this," Corvin shrieked as Vane and 2 guards seized his arms. "I am the Elder of Ironridge. You will fracture the pack. The Northern Lords will not follow a king who takes orders from a blind Southern whore." Gideon moved faster than human eyes could track. In a fraction of a second, he had crossed the room, his massive hand wrapping around Corvin's throat, lifting the Elder entirely off the ground. The sickening sound of cracking cartilage echoed in the room. "She is your queen," Gideon snarled, his eyes bleeding into absolute, endless black. "And if the pack fractures because they cannot see her worth, then I will burn the pack to the ground and build it anew from the ashes." He tossed Corvin to the guards. "Throw him in the ice cells. Prepare the vanguard. If Lord Harlan is waiting for us at the Howling Pass, it would be rude to keep my father-in-law waiting." Later that night, as the fortress prepared for war, Gideon stood on the balcony of their chambers, staring out at the frozen mountains. He wore his heavy battle armor, his iron crown resting loosely on his brow. The weight of his kingdom seemed to press down on his broad shoulders. Isolde walked up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist, pressing her cheek against his cold armor. His aura, usually a bright, protective gold, was currently swirling with dark shades of blue and stormy gray. "You are worried," she whispered. Gideon sighed, resting his large hands over hers. Corvin was right about one thing. The Northern Lords are traditionalists. They follow strength, ruthlessness, and the Iron Crown. By choosing you over the Council's wisdom, I am risking a civil war. Harlan's forces are well rested, and if the Northern Lords hesitate to fight for me, we will be slaughtered. Isolde turned him around, her unseeing eyes gazing up toward his face. She reached up, her fingers tracing the cold iron of the crown on his head. "A crown is just metal, Gideon," she said softly. "It does not make you a king. Your heart does. Your willingness to protect those who cannot protect themselves. That is why I love you." Gideon's breath hitched. It was the first time she had said those words. "I love you." He pulled her into a desperate, crushing kiss. It tasted of winter, of fear, and of profound, earth-shattering devotion. When he finally pulled away, his golden eyes were shining. "Stay here," he ordered gently, pressing his forehead to hers. "Bar the doors. If I do not return by dawn, Vane has orders to take you east, across the sea, where you will be safe." "You will return," Isolde said, her seer sight flaring, seeing a blinding light in his future. "I know you will." The Howling Pass was a jagged gorge of black stone and waist-deep snow, earning its name from the vicious winds that shrieked through its narrow corridors. It was a perfect place for an ambush. Gideon led his vanguard of 300 Lycans into the gorge, his massive warhorse carving a path through the snow. The silence was deafening. There was no sign of Harlan's forces. Suddenly, the wind shifted. The scent of silver and ash flooded the air. "Above us!" Vane roared. Thousands of flaming arrows rained down from the cliffs above. The southern archers, equipped with silver-tipped weapons lethal to Lycans, had taken the high ground. Chaos erupted. Warhorses screamed, and Lycans shifted into their massive feral forms, trying to scale the icy cliffs to reach their attackers. From the end of the pass, a massive horn blew. Lord Harlan rode forward, flanked by 500 heavily armored cavalrymen. Beside him rode a figure wrapped in dark furs, Corvin. The elder had escaped the ice cells, aided by treasonous guards, and had fled straight to the enemy. "Gideon of Iron Ridge," Harlan's voice echoed through the gorge, dripping with arrogance. "Your reign ends tonight. You traded your kingdom for a blind wretch, and now you will die for her." Gideon didn't bother speaking. He drew his massive battle axe, threw his head back, and released a feral, earth-shaking roar. His vanguard roared back, a terrifying symphony of lichen fury, and charged. The battle was a bloodbath. The snow turned crimson. Gideon fought like a demon, his axe cleaving through armor and bone as if it were paper. But the silver arrows were taking their toll. His warriors were falling. He was heavily outnumbered, and the northern lords who had sworn fealty to him were nowhere to be seen. Corvin's treachery had worked. The other lords had abandoned their king. A silver-tipped arrow caught Gideon in the shoulder. He grunted, stumbling back, shifting into his massive direwolf form to shake off the pain. He tore through Harlan's cavalry, his jaws snapping horses' necks and crushing armor, his golden eyes locked purely on Harlan. He was going to rip the man's throat out. But as Gideon lunged for Harlan, a heavy iron net, laced with silver, was dropped from the cliffs above. It landed directly on the Beast King. The silver burned into his fur, searing his flesh. Gideon roared in agony, thrashing violently, but the more he fought, the tighter the net wrapped around him. Harlan rode up to the trapped king, drawing a long silver broadsword. He looked down at the massive beast with utter disgust. "You are no king," Harlan spat. "You are just a wild dog, and like a rabid dog you must be put down." Harlan raised the sword high. Gideon bared his fangs, ready to meet his death with a snarl. Boom. The sound was not thunder. It was the synchronized slamming of heavy steel shields against the frozen earth. Harlan froze, turning his head. Standing on the ridge at the mouth of the gorge, silhouetted against the rising moon, was a sight that made the blood freeze in the veins of every Southern soldier. It was the full might of the Northern Army. Over 5,000 lichen warriors, armored in black steel, their eyes glowing with predatory fury, and at their head, riding a pristine white warhorse, was not a general. It was Isolde. She wore no armor, only the heavy dire-bear fur cloak Gideon had wrapped her in on the day they met. Her silver hair blew wildly in the wind. Her unseeing eyes were wide open, glowing with a brilliant, blinding blue light. The Seer Queen. When Gideon had left the fortress, Isolde had not barred her doors. Using her newly awakened sight, she had walked straight into the camps of the hesitant northern lords. She didn't use politics. She used their own secrets. She exposed their fears, their hidden loyalties, and their undeniable bond to their alpha. She spoke to their souls, binding them not to a crown of iron, but to the undeniable truth of the pack. "Harlan of Ashbourne," Isolde's voice projected through the gorge, not loud, but carrying a terrifying ancient resonance that echoed in the minds of everyone present. "You chained your own flesh to a wagon. You sought to manipulate the North, but you forgot one thing." She pointed a single, pale finger down at her father. "The North remembers, and the North protects its own." Isolde dropped her hand. The Northern Army surged forward like a tidal wave of black steel and fur. It was not a battle. It was an execution. The Southern cavalry was crushed in minutes. The archers on the cliffs were torn to pieces by lichens scaling the walls with sheer, unadulterated rage. Vane rode fiercely into the fray, leaping from his horse to hack away the silver net binding his king. Gideon shifted back to his human form, naked, bleeding, and entirely unconcerned with his wounds. He marched straight through the chaos, the battle parting around him like water around a stone, until he reached Lord Harlan. Harlan was on the ground, his horse dead beneath him. He scrambled backward in the snow, weeping in terror as the bloody, massive form of the Beast King towered over him. "Please," Harlan begged. I yield." Gideon looked down at the man who had tormented his mate for 20 years. He didn't use a weapon. He simply reached down, grabbed Harlan by the collar of his expensive armor, and lifted him effortlessly into the air. "You yielded your life the moment you put my mate in chains," Gideon whispered, his voice deadly calm. With a sickening crunch, Gideon snapped the lord's neck, tossing the body into the snow like garbage. The battle was over. The surviving Southern soldiers surrendered, dropping their weapons into the blood-stained snow. Corvin, trying to crawl away, was dragged back by his own northern guards, left bound and weeping at the king's feet. Gideon didn't look at the prisoners. He didn't look at the cheering army. He walked straight toward the white horse. Isolde slid down from the saddle, stumbling slightly in the snow. Before she could fall, Gideon caught her, burying his face in her neck, breathing in the scent of rainwater and vanilla that anchored his soul. "You foolish, brave, beautiful girl," he choked out, holding her so tightly she could feel the heavy, erratic thud of his heart. "I told you to stay behind the walls. I am your Luna," she replied softly, her hands framing his bloody face. The glowing blue light faded from her eyes, returning them to their milky, sightless state. "Your enemies are my enemies. I could not let you fight them alone." The northern lords, the very men who had doubted her, gathered around them. They dropped to their knees in the snow, bowing not just to their alpha, but to the seer queen who had united them. One of the lords stepped forward, holding out the jagged black iron crown that had fallen from Gideon's head during the battle. "My king, your crown." Gideon looked at the piece of iron. It represented decades of terror, isolation, and bloodshed. It represented a rule built on fear. He took the crown in his hands. And then, with a flex of his massive arms, the Beast King bent the thick, cursed iron, snapping it entirely in half. He dropped the broken pieces into the snow. The lords gasped. "The era of the Iron Crown is dead," Gideon declared, his voice ringing through the gorge. He turned, pulling Isolde tightly against his side. "From this day forward, I rule not by fear, but by the strength of the bond. My mate is my compass. She is my sight. Let the realms know that the Beast King has fallen, and the true reign of the North has begun." Years later, historical texts often compared to the legendary Treaty of Westphalia for bringing unprecedented peace to a fractured land would document the golden age of the North. Ashbourne was absorbed into the northern territories, its people finally freed from the cruel tyranny of Harlan's bloodline. Beatrice, Isolde's golden sister, was stripped of her titles and forced to work the very silver mines she had once profited from. As for Corvin, he was banished to the frozen wastelands, left to wander the ice with only his treachery to keep him warm. He was never seen again. In the heart of Highreach, the fortress was transformed. The dark, oppressive obsidian was brightened by massive hearths, vibrant tapestries, and the laughter of pups. Isolde never regained her physical sight, but she never needed it. Her seer abilities flourished, guiding the kingdom with unparalleled wisdom and compassion. She became the most beloved Luna in Lycan history, a queen who could see the truth in men's souls. And Gideon? The feared Beast King of the North never wore a crown again. He didn't need one. His authority was unquestioned, his strength unmatched, and his heart completely and utterly bound to the silver-haired girl who had once been chained in the snow. Every night, before the hearth fire, the massive, scarred warlord would kneel before his blind queen, resting his head in her lap as she stroked his hair. He was her protector, her alpha, her fated mate, and she, the blind Omega they threw away to die, was the only one who had ever truly seen him. Are you obsessed with fated mates, rejected Omegas, and alpha kings who would burn the world for their queens? Don't miss out on more spine-tingling werewolf romances and dramatic fantasy stories. Hit that like button, share this epic tale with your fellow fantasy romance lovers, and subscribe to our channel for weekly audio stories that will leave you breathless. Comment below what you thought of Isolde's seer powers, and ring the notification bell to never miss a chapter.